We're ready. struggle to believe you have not let go of me. God, my rock, God, my rock, God, my rock. Carried through the darkest storms, you have held me in your arms. God, my rock, God, my rock, God, my rock. In the blessing of pain, through it all you never failed me. You are the strength of my heart. You are the strength of my heart. I can rely on you. I can rely on you. You are the joy of my life. You are my song in the night. There is no one as true. Jesus, I trust in you. When my heart is overwhelmed, I will look to you alone. God, my rock, God, my rock, God, my rock. You will stand when others fall. You are faithful through it all. God, my rock, God, my rock, God, my rock. You are the strength of my heart. You are the strength of my heart. I can rely on you. I can rely on you. You are the joy of my life. You are my song in the night. There is no one as true. Jesus, I trust in you. I trust in you. Trust in you.
Rahab did not allow the culture and the fear of people around her to define her and who she was and what she could or could not do. Throughout the whole story, we can see Rahab's boldness. She takes risks. She declares that the Lord, your God, is God in heaven above and here on earth. And even though she barely knows this God, she's willing to risk everything. She never knew what that one act of courage would change in her life. Where do you need to take a risk? Where do you need to act on your faith? Maybe without even fully understanding God of the universe, but simply stepping out in faith. See, you and I will never know what kind of impact in this world we can have if we show up, take risks, and declare that God is God of heaven above and here on earth.
So the spies have gone back to the camp of the Israelites, and they tell Joshua how scared the people of Jericho are of the Lord God. Now, you're going to hear more about Jericho next week. I know some of you are really anxious to hear the walls come down, but you're going to have to wait for a week. It takes about a week for the walls to come down anyway, right? So we don't want to get ahead of ourselves. So back to the camp. The destination in sight is the city of Jericho. Now, the problem is there's still between them and the city a river, and they have to get across that. Now, they're already in part of the land that was promised to their ancestor Abraham. However, that was only part of the land. The reason why they want to cross that river is because the rest of that land is on the other side of the river. So what to do? On top of the fact, though, that there's a river, it's also the flood season. The season, it's spring and it's overflowing, so it's way wider and way deeper than it ordinarily would be. Now, the Mossad agents, the Israelite spies, they come back and what they had done probably was actually swim across. It was considered to be very heroic in the ancient world, and you can read stories about Assyrian armies swimming across rivers to attack their enemies. But we're not talking about a military population here. We're not talking about an army. We're talking about primarily a civilian population here. They've been living in the desert for about 40 years. How many of them still know how to swim, or you never had a chance to learn how, if you get it now? So put a pin in that for the moment, and let's start working through the account. We're going to read through a fair bit of the narrative in the 3rd and 4th chapters of Joshua today. So we start reading like this. Early in the morning, Joshua and all the Israelites set out for Shittim, be careful how you read that, and went to the Jordan, where they camped before crossing over. After 3 days, the officers went throughout the camp, giving orders to the people. When you see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God and the Levitical priests carrying it, you are to move out from your positions and follow it. And you say, I've heard of this thing before. And I say, you probably have heard of this thing before. The Ark of the Covenant, the Ark of the Testimony, or just the Ark, depending on when you've heard of it. But it's all sort of the same thing. Now, the Ark itself was a rectangular box. It was more than a meter long, 70 centimeters tall, 70 centimeters wide. The top, the whole thing was made of acacia wood, gold plated on the inside and out. The top, though, was solid gold, and on top of the top sat 2 gold cherubim that would face each other, wings outstretched, faces towards the cover. Now, inside the ark, there were a few different things. You probably have heard that the 10 Commandments, the tablets that God gave to Moses, those were inside. But there were 2 other things that were told in the book of Numbers, but also the book of Hebrews. They say were inside inside the ark. The first was the staff of Aaron. Aaron was Moses' brother. He was the first high priest. It's a long story in terms of why it was there. We're told in Numbers, if you want to go read that, number 17. And so his staff is in the ark, but also a jar of manna, which is this bread-like substance that God had provided for the nation of Israel, the people of Israel, while they were in the desert, giving them something to eat. So this jar of theirs, remember God's provision as well. And they're complaining and whining and all that sort of stuff. You can go look at that stuff yourself. But the most important thing with the ark was what it represented. And it represented the presence of God. That wasn't to mean that he lived in the ark or it was some sort of idol. No. He would actually later call it his footstool. This was not God, and he was not in it, but it represented his presence. Now, the Israelites, they're looking at this river and they're thinking, hey, Josh, what do you think? We got to get across this river. How are we going to get to the other side? And no, that's not a joke. I was born in the desert, dude. I don't know how to do that thing. What do you call it? Swim? I don't know how to do that. We haven't done that. And we don't have any, I think they're called boats. We don't have any of those either. So what's the plan, Josh? How are we going to get through there? Sorry, did you say God is going to tell me? Okay, we keep going. Then you will know which way to go, since you have been this way before. But keep a distance of about 2,000 cubits, that's about 900 meters, between you and the ark. Do not go near it. Joshua told the people, consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do amazing things among you. Now, there's that kind of a weird word there. We don't use this word, consecrate. But really all it was meaning for them was to basically make themselves right with God. Make sure that there's nothing that's preventing them from that relationship, sort of dividing them unnecessarily. A lot of commentators will connect this word consecrate with a word in the New Testament that we know as repent, which basically means to turn around, turn towards God, change your mind, this sort of stuff in there. But really what it would have meant probably for these people, all I really would have done was they would have taken a bath, they would have changed their clothes, and husbands and wives would keep their hands to themselves for a little while. That's all they really would have done. It was all sort of external, the law at that point, sort of the rules that they would follow, and this is sort of how they would consecrate themselves. Joshua said to the priests, take up the Ark of the Covenant and pass on ahead of the people. So they took it up and went ahead of them. So the ark is going to go first. It's leading them. They're not simply taking the ark with them. It is actually going out in front of them. This is not a talisman that would bring them luck a few hundred years later. The nation of Israel kind of thought it was that, and it turned out very badly for them because they totally misunderstood what the ark represented, that it represented the presence of God. So the ark goes first, but why the distance? I don't know. Maybe a couple different things. One, maybe because it was out in front of the people, they could have a better line of sight. Sort of it's far enough out so it's not right in front of the very people in front. You're not going to see it very well. Maybe it's out there showing them where to go. They can see it all better themselves. Or maybe this is simply God emphasizing the fact that this is his campaign, not theirs. He is leading them, and by a distance, into what he called them to. We keep reading. And the Lord said to Joshua, "Today I will begin to exalt you in the eyes of all Israel, so they may know that I am with you as I was with Moses." Now, Joshua has been the long-established eventual successor to Moses. We know that. This wasn't a momentary decision, sort of a flip decision. Nobody else is around. Let's choose Joshua. Joshua has had this coming for a while. However, this is where God is saying to Joshua, "I will establish you in the eyes of the Israelite as their full and rightful leader, my chosen leader." Keep reading. "Tell the priests who carry the Ark of the Covenant, when you reach the edge of the Jordan's waters, go and stand in the river." So Renata loves this. I love this. And not just because she's my wife, but because it's actually cool. The command isn't to go to the river and wait for God to do something. The command is, go and put your feet in the water. This is participatory. This is, are you with me? Let's go, right? You act, I act, we do this together. They are invited into the process of what God is doing. They must take a step of faith. Have you ever seen the movie Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade? It's a great movie. It's the third of a series of films. We'll pretend that the fourth doesn't exist because it was horrible. So a bit of a spoiler alert. You should still go see this film. It's actually on Netflix. This whole film is an expedition to go find the Holy Grail. It's a quest for the Holy Grail. And right near the end of the film, Indiana Jones gets to this point where he must take a step of faith. The problem is all he can see in front of him is this huge chasm. He has no idea how he's going to cross this. But everything tells him, everything he knows about this is telling him, you simply must take that step. So he musters up all the courage he can, and he sets his foot out and takes that step. And discovers when he takes that step, and only when he takes that step, that there is actually a bridge that leads across. He couldn't see it before, but he only came to know it was there by experiencing it holding him up. He had to take a step of faith. Joshua says to the Israelites, "Come here and listen to the words of the Lord your God. This is how you will know that the living God is among you, and that he will certainly drive out before you the Canaanites, Hittites, Hivites, Perizzites, Girgashites, Amorites, and Jebusites," a lot of ites. "See, the ark of the covenant of the Lord of all the earth will go into the Jordan ahead of you." And here's what's going to happen when you do what I'm telling you to do, he says. "And as soon as the priests who carry the ark of the Lord of all the earth, set foot in the Jordan, its waters flowing downstream will be cut off and stand up in a heap. So when the people broke camp to cross the Jordan, the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant went ahead of them. Now the Jordan is at flood stage all during harvest, like I told you. So what that means is, as I said, the river's going to be about twice as wide as it usually was, and it's going to be way deeper. So it would have been tough at any time, but now it's even harder. Yet as soon as the priests who carried the ark reached the Jordan and their feet touched the water's edge, the water from upstream stopped flowing. It piled up in a heap a great distance away at a town called Adam in the vicinity of Zarethan. While the water flowing down to the Sea of Arabah, that is the Dead Sea, it was never called the Dead Sea in the Old Testament, was completely cut off. So the people crossed over opposite Jericho. The priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord stopped in the middle of the Jordan and stood on dry ground, while all Israel passed by until the whole nation had completed the crossing on dry ground. Now before they crossed, the Lord said to Joshua, "Choose 12 men from among the people, one from each tribe," and tells them what they should do. Joshua tells them what God told him. Go over before the ark of the Lord your God in the middle of the Jordan. Each of you is to take up a stone on his shoulder, according to the number of the tribes of Israel, to serve as a sign among you. In the future, when your children ask you, what do these stones mean? Tell them that the flow of the Jordan was cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it crossed the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. These stones are to be a memorial to the people of Israel forever. Now the priest who carried the ark remained standing in the middle of the Jordan until everything the Lord had commanded Joshua was done by the people. Just as Moses had directed Joshua, the people hurried over. And as soon as all of them had crossed, the ark of the Lord and the priest came to the other side while the people watched. The men of Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh crossed over, ready for battle in front of the Israelites as Moses had directed them. That day the Lord exalted Joshua in the sight of all Israel, as he said he would do, and they stood in awe of him all the days of his life, just as they stood in awe of Moses. Then the Lord said to Joshua, command the priests carrying the ark of the covenant law to come up out of the Jordan. So Joshua commanded the priests, come up out of the Jordan. And the priests came up out of the river, carrying the ark of the covenant of the Lord. No sooner had they set their feet on dry ground than the waters of the Jordan returned to their place and ran at flood stage as before. On the 10th day of the first month, the people went up from the Jordan and camped at Gilgal on the eastern border of Jericho. And Joshua set up at Gilgal the 12 stones they had taken out of the Jordan. He said to the Israelites, in the future, when your descendants ask their parents, what do these stones mean? Tell them, Israel crossed the Jordan on dry ground, for the Lord your God dried up the Jordan before you until you had crossed over. The Lord your God did to the Jordan what he had done to the Red Sea, when he dried it up before us until we had crossed over. He did this so that all the peoples of the earth might know that the hand of the Lord is powerful, and so that you might always fear the Lord your God. So there's two things here that are really, really significant. Two parts of this. The first is the miracle of bringing his people across the river into the new life, into the new land that he had promised them. And the memorial being set up in order to help them remember that. Remember what God had done. You know, when we think of miracles, I've said so many times before, we tend to think of miracles as being something like we got a really good parking spot at the mall, or a meeting ended on Zoom early today. Yeah, you've had that maybe this week. You're really, really excited. It's a miracle that it ended like that. Or maybe you took an exam and you didn't really study, but you still passed and maybe even got a good grade. It's a miracle. Well, no, it's not. You just didn't study and you got lucky because everything lined up with what you'd done. Those aren't miracles. When you begin to look through Scripture, what you see again and again is that miracles occur. The goal was always to show the power and authority of God. They weren't magic tricks. They weren't party tricks just to impress people. They weren't primarily for entertainment, although I'm sure they probably did impress people and maybe sometimes entertain people too. They were signs of something much, much greater. They were signs of God's work on earth. God has assured the nation of Israel of the ultimate victory, that they would be able to accomplish the taking of the land the way that he had told them they were going to be able to do this. He had shown his power and given credibility in the eyes of the Israelites to Joshua's leadership, and he has shown his people that they can put their trust in him. That's what he wanted from them, and that's what he wants from you, and what he wants from me. 40 years before, God had said, when they came to the edge of the land of Canaan, God had said, you can trust me. You can trust me to help you take over this land. Moses sent out the 12 spies. All 12 came back. 2 of them, only 2, said, yes, we can trust God to do what he said he would do. The 10 others said, no, we can't. So the lack of faith prevailed. The other spies who came back said, we can't do it. Their voice was carried. And the nation of Israel spent the next 40 years wandering in the desert. And now after that, God has shown that he is able to do what he said he would. They are to put memorials after they've crossed the Jordan River in place to remind themselves of this moment, to remind themselves of that event. Now we see this repeated through the Old Testament as well, where people would erect a stone, they'd set up a stone in order to remember an event or where God had done something. Put yourself in the position of this group of people for a second as they're about to cross the Jordan River. They sat there on the east side of it, and you've been living here for a long time. There's a difficult obstacle in your way between you and what God has promised you, what God is leading you to. Not only that, but that obstacle might actually take your life if you're not careful. And on top of that, there's a whole group of people on the other side of the river that are not going to welcome you, with maybe a couple of exceptions. It would have just been so much easier to stay put. Stay where they are. They're already there, right? What's hard about that? What's hard about staying in the same place? To cross over, it's so unpredictable. It's an unknown. It's uncertain. Why go do something like that? If they just stay there, they don't have to trust anyone. They can just trust in themselves because they're already there. It's a safe thing to do. Staying put is safe. But they chose to trust. They chose to trust God to do what he said he would do for them. And then they took steps to actually remember what he had done. Think back on your life right now. And think of a time that was uncertain, confusing, unpredictable, maybe even similar to what you're experiencing right now. Some of us are anyway. In the middle of this time. What was it that brought you through that period? Remember those times that God showed himself to you? That he showed you that he is God? Reflect on those and know that he is still God. Be still and know that he is God. Think of the things that God has brought you through. The rivers that you have had to cross, which he led you to. Remember that he is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Pray with me, would you? God, help us remember all that you have done for us. Give us the peace that only you can bring. Help us trust you in all things, at all times, to do what you have promised to us. Remind us when we so easily forget. Amen.
Cast my mind to Calvary, where Jesus bled and died for me. I see his wounds, his hands, his feet, my Savior on that cursed tree. His body bound and drenched in tears, they laid him down in Joseph's tomb, the entrance sealed by heavy stone. Messiah still and all.
Oh, praise
shall pierce the night, and I will